Welcome, everyone, to the Two View Political Podcast, Episode 2. I'm your host, Harvey Ratanpal, alongside me, my co-host, Naveed Balorian.
Hey, guys.
And, for the first time ever, my brother, Harvey Ratanpal, our second guest.
Thanks for having me on. This should be a lot of fun.
Should be. All right, so Happy New Year, guys.
Yeah.
Happy New Year.
Today is January 3rd. We have a lot to cover. It's been a long time since we recorded. So, as usual, we'll go over the Ratanpal Report, which is the list of events that have happened since last time we spoke that we feel like is worth of discussing. So if you guys remember last time, a big discussion we had was on Roy Moore, why people voted for him, and abortion, things of that nature. So to follow up on that, number one on the Ratanpal Report, number one, in a surprising upset, Democrat Doug Jones upsets Republican Roy Moore in race to become Alabama senator. The unusual blue highlight on the Alabamian map is no doubt a product of Roy Moore's controversial history, the most polarizing of which being the sexual misconduct allegations levied against him in the election, allegedly involving relationships with minors. Despite consistently being behind in the polls leading up to the vote, Jones pulled off a victory by a margin of 21,924 votes. With Moore winning 42 counties and Jones only winning 25, his win can be attributed to the huge margins he held in major cities, the four largest counties of Alabama giving him each at least over 56% of their respective electorates. According to exit polls, 98% of Democrats who voted for Jones, while 91% of Republicans who voted for Moore. What are your thoughts?
Well, I mean, I'll start by saying I'm glad it happened. I'm glad Doug Jones won, but no one should really be celebrating, because I think it really came down to Roy Moore was such a scumbag in some people's eyes that Doug Jones was just the one they had to settle for. Because if you look at Doug Jones, there's nothing, impressive about his career. He doesn't have any revolutionary ideas. He's very run-of-the-mill establishment Democrat. So for me, it really just spoke to, how polarized we really are. Like, it got people out to vote, which I'm glad people are voting, but I'd rather this not be the reason they came out. So.
Absolutely. It's just kind of like a lackluster candidate with no redeemable features versus the rapist.
Yeah.
And it should be clear, the former is going to win. But it sucks that those are even the two options.
Well, yeah, but that's kind of the situation we're in. But Democrats need to use this time that they do have, because this is not going to, next election is probably not going to happen again, but they need to use the time that they do have and try to push some things in Congress and try to do something with this seat.
Exactly. That's kind of the saddest part too. Democrats, they got this win, but they still don't have any kind of unifying message of what a Democrat is anymore. Right?
Yeah, with there's the left, like the more extreme wing going far left, and then the quote-unquote centrist Democrats just fading away, and then, everything, the party's kind of in shambles at this point, and we don't know which way it's going.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. So, for what the situation is, it was a good thing. But it's sad that this is the situation that it is.
Right? No, it's certainly a good thing. I mean, it's just like we were talking earlier about the midterm elections coming up this year. The best thing I can expect is Democrats, winning the majority of the Senate and the House. Not because they have a unifying message, like you said, they clearly don't. But it's so they can stop Donald Trump and they can stop these clearly politically and corporate funded, this corporate funded political agenda. So that's really the best I can hope for is, corporations not running our government.
Mm-hmm. But what do you think the end is there? Because I feel like if we keep going the way we're going, Republicans were extremely obstructive during the Obama administration. And now the hope is that in 2018, Democrats win so they can be obstructive in Trump's administration. Is it just going to be back and forth forever? What is the end goal?
I mean, in a perfect world, we have a unified country that moves towards something that's good. But, I mean, right now we're in a position where Republicans hate Democrats and Democrats hate Republicans just because of the label of being a Republican or being a Democrat. And as long as that's present and as long as we don't dispel that, we're going to continue seeing this kind of one president builds something up and the next president tears it down and the next president tears that down and the next president tears that down, and we're just going to have a continuous back and forth until something actually happens, which is hopefully what will eventually reach a point where we're moving towards a common goal.
How do you guys see that playing out, though? What steps do you think need to be taken in order for that common goal to be reached?
I don't necessarily see that happening as far as the country moving towards a common goal, because the only way we ever see that is a war, and I certainly don't want that. But the way to get around this obstruction, one president builds it up, the next one tears it down, is to get, for number one, money out of politics. I feel like that would take that would stop funding the polarization that we see, especially with the general public. And also just more objectivity, which I think we'll see if candidates aren't, funded by corporations. They won't have an agenda that they're clearly, that's clearly politically or, corporate funded. Mm-hmm. So I think that'll lead to different elections, less lifetime politicians, and I think that's the biggest thing. Like, I think the vast majority of congressmen and women, they're in there for life. They make a career out of it. Mm-hmm. I think that's terrible. And also, I think a way to stop that is term limits. I think that's, maybe 2 or 3 terms. And I think that's fine. You go in, you go out, and I think that'll really get people who actually want to actually care about the country and not just about lining their wallets.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense that the executive branch has like those 2 term limits, but congressmen can just stay.
It's the only one. Yeah. It's the only one term limits. Yeah.
And do you think like the judicial branch should have term limits too? Then? The Supreme Court.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. Yeah. Just because it's an unappointed, it's an unelected position for life. Like we can impeach them, but that just doesn't happen. Mm-hmm. And like to give the president that kind of power, and obviously it has to be voted on, but essentially it's an unelected position, and we have no say in it.
Yeah.
So I find that ridiculous. And also, going off of that, like when Obama in his last year, he wanted to appoint Merrick Garland, which objectively he was a pretty centrist, even right-leaning conservative or centrist. Mitch McConnell refused to even hold the vote.
Yeah.
I felt that was ridiculous. Like, sure, he's a last year president. You can call him a sitting duck. But, just for one person in Congress to decide, oh, yeah, we're not going to vote on that. Sorry. I think that's a little ridiculous.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, I remember thinking about the whole thing with the Supreme Court. And, I think it just kind of plays into, something I say a lot, how, the executive branch has, too much power at this point in time.
Absolutely,
right?
Yeah.
To just completely decide an entire other branch, judiciary, even though they have to vote on it, and it's another commentary on just how partisan everything is. Right. Going back to the Romare thing, with, how he doesn't even have to vote on it, and Mitch McConnell played that game and he won because now, what's his name?
Neil Gorsuch.
Yeah, now he's in, so he won.
Right,
ridiculous. Good.
Yeah.
Number 2. Following Trump's decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, the United Nations General Assembly voted 128-9 to renounce his recognition. The resolution says, quote, that any decisions and actions which purport to have altered the character, status, or demographic composition of the holy city of Jerusalem has no legal effect, are null and void, and must be rescinded in compliance with relevant resolutions of the Security Council, end quote. Trump has spoken sentiments along the lines that Americans are, quote, tired of being taken advantage of, end quote, at the UN, end quote. We're not going to be taken advantage of any longer, end quote. With this in mind, Trump has threatened to withdraw millions of dollars in aid from the UN if they voted the way they did against the U.S. To offer some perspective, the United Nations peacekeeping budget is $8.27 billion per year. The U.S. pays 28.47% of that, or about $2.4 billion. My first thoughts are, I don't agree with what Trump did, right? To recognize Israel at a time when the majority of the global community does not share his sentiments and thinks that should be I agree that should be something that's kind of left to the powers that are involved in it. But at the same time, I feel worse about this global community that, I do agree with them that we're kind of being taken advantage of, how we give so much money to their budget and that they're telling us how to act as a country, which I feel less secure about. So if I had to take a side on this issue, it would be the one with Trump. What do you guys think?
I'd have to disagree with you there, because while I agree that we should be footing a quarter of the bill for the entire world, as member of the United Nations, I think the whole idea of the United Nations is to get everyone to the table, is to pragmatically discuss, what to do with certain conflicts, certain issues. So, I mean, the notion that just because we pay more, they need to listen to us, I don't think that holds a lot of standing. I think that goes against the whole idea of the United Nations. Whether you think it's working well the way it is, it goes against the fundamental idea that it's the United Nations instead of, oh yeah, we pay more, so we have more voting rights. We can do more than we're entitled to. So while I agree that we shouldn't be paying it, I don't think us paying more entitles us to a bigger opinion.
Well, yeah, for sure. And I think the solution is to, withdraw from having such that big presence of money at the UN. At the same,
I don't think that's so much the solution as that's a separate issue. Because I feel like my tax dollars and I'm being taken advantage of. It's going to the United Nations, but just because they disagree with us, I mean, I almost respect that. That's the whole point. It's to have an open dialogue. It's to say, look, one country did something, and we don't agree with that. As a whole body. So I feel like the money and the decision making process should be left separate.
But I feel like I don't find their findings too legitimate often. The United Nations. I understand the concept is to say, hey, this is the consensus of the global community.
Yeah.
But a lot of times we see countries that shouldn't be given a voice on certain things given a prominent voice. These committees that recycle each year between countries.
Yeah, you're talking about Saudi Arabia.
Like Saudi Arabia on the Human Rights Council. Having that, a prominent voice on something called the Human Rights Council. Yeah. They're making steps towards human rights, but with the place they are in the country, it's despicable.
No, I absolutely agree with you. I mean, it certainly can be run better. And like you said, I mean, Saudi Arabia shouldn't be given a voice when it comes to human rights.
Yeah.
But, talking about this decision, in particular, they don't, it's not a logical decision by any means on Trump's part. It was a decision he solely made.
Yeah.
Our people's representatives didn't have a say in it. So as far all it does is it just creates more turmoil there, because now we're clearly picking a side. We're saying Palestine, any other country that holds any type of claim or importance to Jerusalem. It's like, hey, fuck you, you're done. We don't care. We're with Israel. Mm-hmm. So I feel like even if that's our stance, this is a terrible way. This is a very blunt way to say, hey, we're done with everyone else.
For sure.
So. And I agree that United Nations can be held to a better standard. It's certainly not being run the way it should be.
I agree.
And Trump comes out kind of claiming that this is America against the United Nations, but for the most part, it's Trump against the United Nations because he's the one who came out and said this stuff, and not every American agrees with this, and we don't even have data on where the people stand on this matter, and this is. You can't go out claiming the country is behind you when you have no evidence of the country being behind you. So
absolutely,
this is certainly something that Trump should not have done. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And at the very least, it should have been handled by Congress.
Right.
If they wanted to, for whatever reason,
just spontaneously do this out of the blue.
It'd be a stupid decision, but at least I'd be more on board with it, right. And I'd recognize it more. Yeah.
It goes back to what you guys were saying. The executive branch has too much power right now.
Yeah.
For him to make that kind of globally, politically decisive move without any type of checks and balances, I find it kind of ludicrous.
Mm-hmm.
True. Very true.
He's good?
Yeah.
All right. Number 3, follow-up from last episode over. Now, new news. Number 3, demonstrations have sprung up in Iran of enormous proportions, affected by the dire state of Iran's economy, including rising food prices, cash subsidy rollbacks, and a recent 50% increase in gasoline prices. The protests have taken over an overarching anti-government sentiment, with tens of thousands of people taking to the streets to vent anger at the entire establishment. What started as protests against higher prices and corruption has, on some scale, transformed to a political movement demanding the removal of the current authorities in the Islamic Republic. The protests have taken a violent turn in a number of locations, and state media reports that at least 21 people have been killed in clashes with security forces, while hundreds have already been arrested. President Trump has supported the movements, tweeting, quote, "The great Iranian people have been repressed for many years. They are hungry for food and for freedom. Along with human rights, the wealth of Iran is being looted," end quote. And that, quote, "The people of Iran are finally acting against the brutal and corrupt Iranian regime," end quote. The European Union, or the EU, appears more neutral, declaring it is monitoring the situation and that it expects Iranians' rights to peaceful assembly and freedom of expression to be guaranteed.
I think Trump is doing... I'm not a huge fan of Trump in general, but I think what he's doing here is it's one of the better things he's done, because I think Obama dropped the ball in 2009 when there were other protests going on. There were huge movements in Iran, millions of people pouring out into the streets and trying to bring down the government that was oppressing them. And then Obama kind of took I'm going to stand aside and let the Iranian government deal with it however they want, even though they were clearly violating human rights, which I think is when the United States needs to step in, when human rights are being violated. But in Iran right now, people are sitting with bated breath. They don't want to jump the gun, and I don't want to jump the gun right now. But I think the key thing about this movement that sets it apart from 2009, and if you guys don't know about 2009, is there was kind of a corrupt election held where one presidential candidate, Ahmadinejad, won over another guy who people felt should have won, and there were lots of movements and uprisings and things like that, and that movement was shut down by the government, and people were oppressed and they were killed and they were imprisoned. Now we're in a situation where a similar thing is happening, but the redeeming factor here is there aren't any political leaders here. These are the people coming out, they're people talking, and they're people who are trying to start something. And I think Trump is doing the right thing in backing them, although I do think it's a little early to come out already before the dust hasn't even cleared yet. We haven't seen what's actually going on, but I think this is potential for a good movement and Iran to be put back to its former glory.
Mm-hmm. Do you agree more with the European Union stance then? How they're more or less neutral, but they're declaring they're monitoring the situation, and they expect the Iranians' rights to keep being upheld.
They did the same thing in 2009, though, and that didn't come to fruition. They claimed that they were doing this, and there were clear violations of human rights, and they didn't step in, and no one stepped in. And Iran there's always been unrest there, and it started with British manipulation of oil and other things, and the U.S. stepped in, and monarchies fell, and quote unquote democracies rose, and they became theocracies, and now we're in this huge problem where we find Iran being a terrorist threat. Mm-hmm. And the people are not like that, and that's what needs to be emphasized. The people are trying to have a voice here, and that's what I think is important about this movement.
What do you see as a solution to that? Like, what do you expect, or what would you like to see the U.S. do, or the UN do, or any country with any type of power? What would you like to see done?
For now, just a vocal backing of the people. I think that's important to show that the United States is with the people as far as this goes. I don't think there should be any, military movement there. I think that's overstepping our boundaries, but there should be a constant condemnation of the people who are in power there, because they're oppressive and they're evil people that need to be shown to the world who these people really are. And hopefully that backing will motivate the Iranian people to go out into the streets and hopefully one day force this regime out of office.
So if like you're saying, 2009 was handled very poorly, globally and even in Iran. So if something like that happens again, where there's a violation of human rights, do you expect action from the U.S. or the UN?
That's where it's tough, because that's where the U.S. has no obligation to do anything. But I think as the leader of the free world, we are in a position where we have the power to assist in holding human rights at the most vital point, and that's what we're aiming for. And if we can do that in any way, I think that's important. And if it goes as far as the United States being willing to actually assist with boots on the ground there, then so be it. I'm not sure if I completely agree with that, but I think the most important thing is just a vocal backing until we see what happens then. Because with the Obama administration, he refused to back the people. He said that we're not going to interfere with the Iranian government and Iranian politics, and I think that's one way he made a mistake.
I gotcha. That kind of reminds me of, just Obama supporting the Syrian rebels just a few years ago, and how that almost instantly backfired. So I don't know the state of Iran, but what ended up happening was we were giving brand new Toyota trucks and M4 rifles, AK-47s, whatever we were supplying to literally ISIS members. So I don't know the state of Iran. I know, like you're saying, like it's the people now, right?
Yeah.
But we were under that same notion. So I guess when it gets to that point, I would be more cautious, but I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think supplying them with arms is the answer. I don't think the answer is a military movement. I think this should be a movement of the people. Back even with the Islamic Revolution, that was for the most part a peaceful movement until they came into power and they started killing people off. But they need a peaceful movement that is emphasized on just the people.
Yeah. No, I agree. Because even looking at like Libya, the U.S. kind of took a backseat on that. It was all done via like our air troops, and I think Britain led the way in that. And what we took down Muammar Gaddafi, but what ended up happening, they still turned into a Muslim ruled or Islamically ruled country. We wanted democracy, and I think the state of Libya now is pretty turmoiled, right? So
the difference between Iran and Libya is the Iranian people in general are 100%. There's a mass approval, just a mass disapproval of the people who are currently in office. And the thing that I'm seeing that is positive in this movement compared to the last one was they want to get religion out of the government, and that was one thing that they hadn't emphasized before. But this is one thing that the movement has started to take shape. It first originally began as just an economical thing where they were trying to force that out, but now it's becoming something where we want a democracy and we want everyone to have equal voice and things like that, which we don't know how that will pan out, but I think it's the right direction to be moving in.
Okay. No, I like that a lot more because I feel like in Libya or Syria, like we just kind of backed them because we didn't like their current government. But if what you're saying is like the people's voice is saying they want religion out, I think it's a great idea.
Correct me if I'm wrong. Aren't there a decent amount of like anti-protesters right now? Pro-government?
I don't want to speculate, but I'm gonna have to delve a little bit into the gray area as far as that goes. But Iran's government is notorious for kind of like North Korea putting on these staged acts. Okay. For example, they put out like women in hijabs and stuff, and they're chanting or whatever, and that's the only thing they show on the news, as if they're showing that that's the most prominent group, although these protesters are the actual prominent group that's occurring. So this can be, the anti-protesters, there might be some legitimate ones out there, but, I'd be skeptical as far as it goes.
Yeah. It's like really fucked with that whole thing because like even the number I reported with the 21 people have been killed, our only sources is the state media of Iran. So we there's almost no way of knowing.
And Iran's communication has been cut out for the people from the world. The people can't. Twitter's down, YouTube's down, everything. The social media is down. So we just have to rely on what the Iranian government it says, and they're less than trustworthy.
Yeah, it's disgusting.
Yeah.
He's good.
Mm-hmm.
All right, number 4. 4 Republican and Democratic lawmakers head to the White House today. Their goal is to discuss a long-term spending bill and a possible immigration deal that could provide protections for DACA and enrollees. This is following President Trump making the decision to remove DACA, or the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrival system, that protected young undocumented immigrants who came to the U.S. as children from deportation, an executive order put in place by President Obama. A main concern and reason for its removal was that fact, that it was made through executive action by the President, rather than a legislative decision by Congress. Evidently, upon ending the program, Trump urged Congress to find a legislative solution, which is the plan January 3rd, as Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, House Speaker Paul Ryan, Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, and House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi will attend the White House meeting to find and discuss arrangements for DACA enrollees. It seems the president's prerequisites have been made clear as he tweeted out December 29th that, quote, the Democrats have been told and fully understand that there can be no DACA without the desperately needed wall at the southern border and an end to the horrible chain migration and ridiculous lottery system of immigration, etc. We must protect our country at all costs, end quote. At the same time, a bipartisan push for legislation is being led by Republican Senator Jeff Flake and Democrat Dick Durbin. After Trump tweeted his concerns, Flake responded, saying, quote, we can fix DACA in a way that beefs up border security, stops chain migration for the dreamers, and addresses the unfairness of the diversity lottery. If POTUS wants to protect these kids, we want to help him keep that promise, end quote.
So this is a movement to protect DACA? And
to find a solution that protects the people who are affected by DACA, yes. Okay.
So I understand what Trump is saying, that the reason he thinks the wall is necessary if we have DACA is because if we don't have the wall, it's apparently more people are just going to come in and use DACA to allow their children to stay here and prosper, right? Is that kind of the foundation he's going off of?
Yeah, it's like if his and a lot of other people's notions are like, if we continue to have DACA and we don't find a solution for our border security, then it's just going to keep happening. Mm-hmm. So from my perspective, I see, I don't disagree with him, right? I think we need border security. If that's a wall, like he keeps saying, like, great. Just it's important, that border security. Mm-hmm. But like, have that comprehensive solution in which you deal with these people who were brought here as children. You can argue that it wasn't the smartest move to stop Obama's executive action. You can argue it wasn't a smart move for Obama to make an executive action to do this, because that adds controversy to the bill itself, to the act itself. And because I think it adds a lot of the convolutedness, because you have some people who agree with the tenets of it but disagree with the executive action part. You have people who disagree with the tenets of it, disagree with, you just have a lot of people agreeing and disagreeing a lot now for different reasons, but you don't go about it the right way, which is what I think. Mm-hmm. And I'm really glad that there's bipartisan pushes and talks happening between the leaders of Congress and even these bipartisan pushes by Senator Jeff Flake and Democrat Dick Durbin, which is very nice.
Yeah, I think the bipartisan stuff is, we were talking about how do the United States move forward with this constant quarreling between parties. Mm-hmm. I think bipartisan pushes like this are vital to that, and I think this is a good example of that being put to good use.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I'm like, when Trump, said a few months ago that he's getting rid of DACA and its protections. I was obviously upset, and I understand what you're saying, and even what Trump said. He was saying this is a job for Congress. He felt like Obama overstepped his power in writing an executive action that basically created a temporary amnesty for these people. So I understand what he's saying there, but I don't feel like this was a pragmatic approach to it. But what I'm seeing now is what I wanted to see, because I can't expect Trump to be the good guy, anymore or ever. So this bipartisan approach I think it's a great idea. Even what Trump said, if you take this situation alone, he's saying Democrats need to understand that we can't have these protections and not have border security. I absolutely agree. Just like going back to even Ronald Reagan, the Republican poster boy, and Democrats hate him, but his amnesty program, I thought it would have been great if they beefed up border security. But all they did was say, hey, everyone who's here illegally, here's a path to citizenship, and with no plan to stop it from the future. So, I'm obviously in favor of DACA and supporting these children they only know America as their country. They're Americans as far as I'm concerned. And I would even go as far as saying, protect their parents too. Protect everyone that's here, and then cut it off at the source. Just talking from a human rights perspective, or just, basic humanity, like kicking people back, separating families. I know they broke the law, but how about let's pragmatically try to solve it and stop the source, instead of fighting about who gets to stay. Because I feel like if we just stop the source, we'll never have to deal with this again.
Yeah, I think it's allow everyone who's here to stay here.
Yeah.
And then Stop the source, like you said.
Exactly. So I think we're, I don't know, at least me, I'm one of the few people that say, like, let everyone who's here stay here, and then build your giant wall if you think that'll help. Right. Like, I'm for the wall, and I'm for the immigrants. Like, you know?
Yeah.
I feel like that's not a radical idea.
Right. Sure. Like, I think most people have, like, some sort of thing in line with what ideology you're saying.
Yeah.
You know, most people aren't like the very insane people you see on Reddit on r/TheDonald, and most people aren't the SJW screaming at the college rallies.
Yeah.
You know, most people understand that the people here are people, just like us, and that at the same time you just can't let everyone in. So I think everyone is for some sort of border security and a good answer for the people who are here. That doesn't involve just sending everyone back en masse.
Right. I agree.
Awesome. Number 5. Republicans rejoice and score a sizable victory as their tax reform is passed through to legislation. The bill contains a plethora of reform, with the main focus being new tax cuts and brackets. With changes to the tax rates, the GOP tax bill brings tax cuts to almost all of the 7 tax brackets beginning in 2018. That means the current rates from 10% for the lowest bracket to 39.6% for the highest earners will change. So just some examples of like the brackets. When it comes to let's do this. So if you're earning like $9,500 to $40,000, you're going from 15% in the old rate to 12%. So kind of, would you call that middle class?
No, it's middle class.
Middle class?
That's a little bit lower.
For a single person.
9,000?
Not married.
It depends. I mean, if you got 2 people making $40 a year, that's $80,000 a year. That's middle class.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So it's a big range. So yeah, that's 15% to 12%, and then similarly in 40,000 to 95,000, you're seeing it go from 25% to 22%. So things like that, and then you're seeing those 3% cuts, and then at the very top, you see if you're making over. It used to be 426,000. If you're making over that, it's 39.6%, and now the new ones, if you're making over 500,000, it's 37%. So we see tax cuts across the board, with slight changes to how the brackets are set up. And then, so what are you guys' thoughts on that?
Do you have the corporate data or no?
No, I don't. I can find it.
It's just not important, but I just remember Marco Rubio, after the vote, I think like a week later, he said that he feels like the bill went too far as far as corporate handouts, and he voted for it. It's just like, for me, like, it's not even about the bill's context so much. It's just about people, just how our elected officials voted. You know, like, I feel like a lot of them didn't even read it. You know, Rubio, he only voted because he got an extra stipulation in there. You know, and my biggest gripe with it personally is, like, I'm glad it helps out, you know, American families. But my biggest gripe with it is a couple of things, like the fact that we're not cutting spending at the same time. Like, tax cuts are great, but like, we need the money from somewhere. You know, we were already at a deficit of $500 billion a year. You know, I don't know what it is now after the tax cut, but that's clearly not sustainable. And also the provision in there that got rid of the Affordable Care Act mandate. So that's just going to make Obamacare fail. You know, if you don't like Obamacare, get rid of the whole thing. Which they couldn't do because they knew Americans wanted it. Mm-hmm. But now they just found a more sleazy tactic to get rid of it, make it fail. So overall, I think it's a bad idea.
So what they did, just to clear up, previously in Obamacare, you were mandated to get health care or else you have to pay a fine. And courts ruled that to be allowed technically because they considered it a tax, which is why it's in the tax reform. So it's put into the healthcare reform that the healthcare mandate in Obamacare is to be removed, which will take effect 2019. Just to clarify.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but they also increased government spending through this bill.
Not through this bill, but in their most recent convening of the budget, I believe.
Right. Like Harvey said, you're not having any cuts, so this doesn't make sense what they're trying to pull here.
So would you guys be in favor for it more so, even if it was like social programs that we might consider important?
I wouldn't like that, but at least it would make sense to me, right? Because I understand, you know, talking about political ideologies, priorities are different. When it comes to military, when it comes to defense, when it comes to social programs, food stamps, etc. Public education. Obviously, everyone's priorities are different, right? But I at least want to see a logical train of thought. If you're going to cut taxes, even if you're going to cut social programs, at least you're being logical. I wouldn't support that, but at least it's being logical. This is just I don't know. I feel like there's no long-term plan. You're just setting everything up for failure. You're setting up public health. With the Obamacare mandate, you're setting that up for failure, and obviously our ever increasing national debt.
Right.
So, but if you had to argue, why do you think that they're lowering these rates for the middle class? What's the motive?
Yeah, I mean,
without thinking of spending.
That's what the people want, right?
Okay. So you think it's just kind of just to appeal to the bases?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It makes sense even from like a basic economic standpoint. If you take less money from the people, they have more money to spend. And the majority of obviously lower income and middle class families' incomes and individuals' incomes they spend it. Unlike the rich, which save a lot of it and invest some of it. The middle class and lower class income levels, they spend all of it. So obviously, if the average family will save, a couple grand, that's a couple grand more into the economy, right? But I don't think we need to see that, because we saw with, whether you like it or not, with like how successful our recovery was in 2008 because of, I attribute a lot of it to Obama's policies and, some of his doing. Corporate profits are at an all-time high, right? But we haven't seen that kicked back to actual workers. Like companies like Walmart, they're raking in tens of billions of dollars a year, but we're not seeing any tangible increases in Americans' income. Yeah. So you got to see, it's barely budged since the crash. You got to ask yourself where that money is. It's in their pockets. They're not investing it. So I don't know what the answer to that is. I'm not one who's in favor of forcing companies to spend money, right? But and obviously I understand increasing the minimum wage across the board won't help. Just like my dad owns a business and he wouldn't be able to afford $15 an hour, $20 an hour. But with companies like Walmart, they can clearly afford to pay more than the federal minimum wage of $7.25, but they're not. And in a lot of states, their workers are on food stamps because they live under the poverty line. So it just comes down to, this doesn't solve a whole lot. It's like a Band-Aid, and you're not actually addressing the injury. So.
Yeah. What do you guys think of the Obamacare mandate being taken out?
Whether you're in favor of the mandate or not, because I don't know how I feel about it, forcing a tax on people for healthcare, it's not a pragmatic approach what they're doing. Just like any insurance system, like anyone who drives a vehicle, you need insurance, right? It's not the people that get in accidents that need the insurance. Everyone needs insurance, right? Because the people that get into car accidents are subsidized by the people that don't, right? And that's the basics of insurance. That's the very basic foundation of it. So if you take out the healthy people and now insurance companies are only paying for the sick people, obviously that's not sustainable. So if you get rid of the mandate, you're just encouraging people not to get health insurance. So.
But do you think their right to not have it supersedes the potential drawbacks to everyone not having it? Because me personally, that's how I feel.
I don't think that's relevant, at least when discussing this topic in specifically the mandate, getting rid of the mandate. Because if these Republicans and a lot of conservatives feel very strongly about that, which, like I said, I don't know how I feel about it. I could go on either side of the issue for the mandate, but get rid of the entire thing, because that's what Obamacare is built on. That's what the Affordable Care Act is. The only way it works is if everyone pays, right? So what we saw, for the last almost 10 years now, right, or 8 years, we saw Republicans try to repeal Obamacare. Various tactics. We saw it, I think like hundreds of times it's been voted on, and they failed because they realized their constituents want it. whether it lost by 30 votes or whether it lost by 1 vote. Very recently, John McCain was that tiebreaker, right? They realized the American people wanted it, or at least wanted a replacement. But what they did here was very, very underhanded, in that they got rid of the mandate without really explaining to people what this mandate does. And a little bit of critical thinking will tell you it'll break the system. It'll let it fail. And then so once that happens, Obama and the Republicans will come out, oh, see, Obamacare was never designed to work. It's like, no, like, you made it fail. If it fails, it's your fault. So I think it's just a sleazeball tactic. It's very underhanded.
Could you also argue, though, like, it's not entirely just that they're trying to sneak it in? It could also be they see perhaps repealing Obamacare right away could have, like, detrimental effects immediately. So this is maybe like a slower, more pragmatic way of doing that?
No, because it's not a more pragmatic way of doing it, because these companies are still held to the same rules. They can't increase people's premiums based on their illnesses like they used to, which I think is a good thing, but it only worked with an individual mandate, right? So it's just like if you got rid of the mandate that says, every car owner needs to have insurance, you can drive on a public road, right? And only the people that get into accidents need it. No one's going to pay for insurance. I'm not going to pay for insurance, right? But what happens when, people start crashing? Insurance companies have to pay up, but they don't have a decent source of revenue. They're going to go under, and then everyone's going to end up in massive piles of debt. So as far as pragmatic, that's the least pragmatic thing you can do. I understand principally.
You're right. So
principally, it's great.
So then you think that principle is superseded then by that greater need?
Yes, because it was already put in. The same, I feel like Americans' opinion hasn't changed a whole lot about Obamacare. And if it has, it's probably become more positive since it was enacted. Mm-hmm. But if they really feel that strongly, get rid of the whole thing. It's pretty, I don't know, for me it's a pretty simple concept.
Yeah, I completely understand what you're saying. And, because it's built upon this...
it's the foundation.
Yeah, the mandate is the foundation, so it's just a shitty way of repealing it.
Yeah.
Right? But at the same time, me as someone who's not a Republican, not a Democrat, and does not like the mandate,
mm-hmm.
right? I'm is in very opposition to it because I feel like it infringes upon your personal liberties of choosing what you want to buy.
Yeah.
I feel like even though if it causes it to fail, it might be it's better than having it there in the first place and keeping it there.
Yeah, so I completely understand that side of the argument, and that's completely valid. Like I said, I'm on the fence there. You know, it can certainly be argued very well that it's an infringement on your liberties, mm-hmm. right? But if like you said, it's the foundation of it, right? So if you really feel that way, it's getting rid of the mandate. All that does is creates a domino effect, right? Because then the insurance companies go under. Then the hospitals have to continue providing service, right? Or they start turning people away like they do in a lot of developing countries, right? So if I'm in a car accident, it doesn't matter if I have insurance. I'm going to get treated. If I have a heart attack, I'm going to get treated. They'll foot me with a $70,000 bill, but I'll get treated. So the only way that, getting once the insurance companies collapse and hospitals have to start charging people, people can't pay that. Then the hospitals will go under. The only way to combat that is to not treat people. So you have to ask yourself, is that a country you want to live in, mm-hmm. right? And I'm not saying those are the only options. We need to get together and discuss, what can we do to pragmatically and objectively, look at our healthcare system and see, look, we're spending just as much as, Canada, right? But their citizens don't have to pay anything. Our tax dollars are the same amount are going into it in a very similar amount. So, what are we doing wrong?
That's true.
Where is our money being wasted?
Okay. Yeah, I agree. It's I disagree with the mandate, but this is the wrong way to go about it completely.
Yeah. No, just a lot of agreeing. I can see both sides here.
Yeah.
It's definitely a borderline issue
for sure. And just to clarify, this mandate is not to be removed until 2019, so this entire year. All right, number 6. President Trump recently tweeted, quote, "The stock market is setting record after record, and unemployment is at a 19-year low. So many things accomplished by the Trump administration, perhaps more than any other president in first year. Sadly, will never be reported correctly by the fake news media, ! End quote. So, without further ado, in no particular order, here are the accomplishments of President Trump's administration. Number 1, the stock market is up by 5,000 points. Number 2, the GDP, gross domestic product, is at 3.3% after hovering around 2% during the Obama administration. Number 3, Supreme Court picked Neil Gorsuch has been approved, fulfilling the conservative role that the late Antoine Scalia filled. Number 4, the biggest tax reform that we just talked about in 30 years has been passed, and the Obamacare mandate has been repealed in that. Number 5, President Trump has voiced his intention to withdraw from the Paris Climate Accord by the earliest date possible, 2020. Number 6, President Trump has withdrawn from the Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership, stopping it in its tracks. Number 7, less regulation. Early on in his presidency, Trump signed an executive order directing agencies to eliminate 2 pieces of legislation for every one kept in place. Agencies have already issued 67 deregulations, and according to the White House, 1,600 total have been withdrawn, delayed, or made inactive. Number 8. After extensive reworking, Trump's ban on travel from Muslim-majority countries is into effect. And number 9, he has the worst first-year approval rating of any president ever.
About the stock market being at an all-time, is that at an all-time high or kind of a time period high?
It's an all-time high, right? It's at 20,000.
I believe so, yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But touching on some of that stuff, for example, the Muslim ban. So,
Yeah.
So he's bragging about infringing on people's constitutional rights. Is that what's happening now? He's bragging about.
So, to my understanding, with the reworking that the Muslim ban is consistently put into, if they have ties here, familial ties to someone already in the U.S., then they are allowed through at this moment in time. But if it's someone visiting, they cannot.
I don't know. The thing is just.
I don't think that's unconstitutional.
It's very. The thing is, he's trying to market it as if it's not a Muslim ban, right? That's what he tries to do. And then the one country that actually has been a terrorist threat to the United States consistently has been Saudi Arabia, and they're not banning travel from there. I don't understand where the jump in logic is. I mean, it's clear that that's like a business tie for him, and he's preserving that connection, and then he's banning travel from other countries where there haven't been any terrorist activities towards the United States. So I think that's not something that he should be too pleased with, or the people of the United States should be too happy about.
Yeah, and I think even though like that was a campaign promise, because even if it's been botched, I think the people are in agreement with you with my last point. This is by the polls, which however you want to take them. He has the worst first-year approval rating of any president ever. It's saying a lot. And so we see with things like the Muslim ban, like we see his him being a hypocrite in a lot of ways. Like first he's arguing that it's not a Muslim ban, and look at Saudi Arabia, I'm not even banning them, and they're all Muslims. But at the same time, every other country, I believe it's 10 countries now, maybe 11. They're all Muslim majority countries. So, yeah.
I don't pretend to know his motive. I don't know his motive for a lot of things, But with this, it just clearly seems like he's just trying to appease his base. His base supporters, like 30% of people that voted for him, they'll stay loyal. His approval rating won't go below 35% or 30%. So I think it's just him trying to show, like, hey, look, I'm working for you guys, This superficial act that I'm doing, like, this is for you guys. And he's, hiding it under the false pretense that it's for national security. When, like we're saying, like Saudi Arabia was the biggest threat. A lot of people think they're behind 9/11, maybe even state funded. Like, clearly this isn't national security. This is something else. I don't know what it is. I personally think it's him trying to appease his base, but I don't know.
Yeah, and then other things.
Like the stock market. That's like I'll give him that. Like he's right. Like under his administration, we have seen the stock market hit a record high. Right? He's not wrong. But now we have to look at that a little bit closer, right? We have to look at what exactly has he done that he thinks, or what does he think he's done to contribute to that, right? Because the stock market initially, crashed in 2008. The credit bubble popped. The housing market crashed, right? And the Obama administration came in and put in a lot of regulations on banks as far as mortgages, real estate, and obviously the stimulus package, which brought back to life a lot of companies, right? So that's where we saw the initial increase, right? And those continued regulations, people continued to, their confidence continued to grow in our stock market. So for me, I feel like he's riding the wave. So not to say like he has nothing to do with it, because when he was elected, the stock market went up, sizably. And that's obviously, investor confidence in that he's going to get rid of regulation. Yeah. But at the same time, like, he can only take credit to so much of that, in my opinion. So I'm giving him credit where credit's due, I feel. But the way he talks about it, like how he's done everything, like there's not a whole lot of tangible, like, regulation or deregulation that you can really point and say, like, hey, look, this is what made it happen.
Yeah, and I think it's nearly impossible to really say, like, well, what's in part due to Obama, what's in part due to Trump. When we, like, how much of what?
You can't say what exactly, but I mean, like, you can look at the data and you can see when did it start, why did it start, and why does it continue to grow. And if there's no like articulable or tangible, like I said, regulation, deregulation, like at the end of the day, it's probably just investor confidence is the reason it's continued to go up.
Yeah, and but to the point with the less regulation, the White House has reported that a lot of regulations have been withdrawn, delayed, or made inactive.
You see that number though, 1,600. They don't even say what those are.
Yeah, I to my understanding, they're planning to do it when Congress is in session.
Okay, and I think that's great. Like, I'll look at it with an open mind. But with the way it sits, like, he's just giving us numbers. Yeah, absolutely. Like meaningless numbers. So that's great. And that whole policy where like for every regulation you add, you have to get rid of 2. What does that even mean? That seems like a very strange rule.
For every regulation you're keeping, you have to eliminate 2. Is what he said.
Yeah, that doesn't make any objective sense to me. Why not just look at every regulation pragmatically? Like, that just seems like a very childish way to look at it.
Again, I think it's a lot of it is just playing to his base. You guys saw the photo shoot he had where he had like a bunch of pieces of paper in like a tower, and then like he cut a red ribbon to like, it was like the 1960s regulations versus the present day ones. And he cut like a ceremonial ribbon saying, "Oh, look at all the ones we have now." It's just like little ribbon paper versus like the stack of papers we had before. Like, how much money that paper cost, and how many trees, and like, yeah. So I think a lot of the accomplishments he's made, which like, okay, like I'd say he did do things that are commendable. Such as withdrawing from the Trans-Pacific Trade Partnership. Okay. Like I think any candidate who won the election said they would have done that. Bernie, Hillary, Trump.
Yeah,
but it's still,
they all have their different reasons, but yeah.
I think it's still kind of commendable for him to do that. That like.
But then with the global climate agreement thing, I think the United States stays a world leader as long as it's a progressive nation that looks to science and looks to technology to preserve, as their forefront, right? As the forefront. But now that they're denying I'm not going to call it fact, but pretty much fact. Global warming is pretty much a fact. I think
it is. The consensus is agreed upon in the scientific community.
Right, and it's been practically proven that this is occurring and it is changing our Earth, right?
It is. That's occurring.
Yeah. So what's
the debate is if it's how much of it is
caused by humans.
And how much can we change,
and the rate it's going at. Exactly. So yeah.
So
by stepping out, he's kind of just pretending that this isn't a real thing, and
I think I see 2 things with that, because on one hand, I think the symbolism of why he's doing it is troublesome. That he's kind of, again, playing to his base, his uneducated base, who doesn't want to have that open mind of climate change maybe potentially happening. Yeah. But at the same time, when you like look into the ins and outs of the Paris Climate Accord, it's very almost meaningless. Very little is actually anything enforced.
It's kind of like it's a symbolic stance against the possibility of human action on global warming, and they're coming together to promote a safer environment and better human habits or whatever that might be. Sure, it's not enforced, but the convening and the symbolism of it, I think, is important in its own right, and I think it should be preserved. I mean, the reason for him leaving it is because he's trying to pretend it doesn't exist. He's claiming that it's a ridiculous thing. So I think
I see what you're saying. For me,
it's anti-science.
No, I completely agree. He's anti-science. But with the Paris Agreement, I don't know exactly what it entailed. Like a lot of sources were saying that it would have us required to pay billions of dollars up front to change a lot of our practices and a lot of corporate practices, which you can argue is a good thing or bad thing. But what my biggest gripe with Trump and the environment is not the Paris Agreement, because like you said, it's symbolic, it's important, but at the same day, it's not enforceable. What I hate is that how he's basically made the EPA ineffective. For all intents and purposes, they might as well not exist. I don't know I forgot who the head of it was, but basically, like he had the opinion that it's a useless, department, useless organization.
Yeah.
So it's just like, how are you going to make that guy the head of the Environmental Protection Agency? And when it comes to the environment, like, with Trump, like he just took away 1.3 million acres of a national monument in Utah, and obviously that goes back to why does he have that kind of power, but it also goes to like the lack of importance or the short-term goals he sees, because I think preserving our environment is very important, especially these national forests. But now, leaving that federally unprotected, like it was before, opens it up for corporations to buy it, and get whatever resources they want and ruin the land.
Well, like in this, I want to say something like to what you said. In this particular case, I agree with you. I agree with you. EPA is important. Something that should be upheld. But the notion that someone who disagrees with the EPA's effectiveness and how effective it should be to be put in there, I don't think that's inherently wrong. It's like saying a president can't be libertarian because it's the head of the federal government. Like that's something that needs to happen.
I see what you're saying, but and that makes complete sense. Like you can have, like you said, like libertarian president doesn't need a big federal government, but for the EPA, like they're just number one, they defund, like Trump defunded them, right? Number two, they're not enforcing the rules they have on the books. That our elected officials put in place, because we wanted them to. So now it's one thing to be against it, but it's another thing to not enforce it.
Yeah.
So like, be against protecting the environment. I'll hear out your argument, but to simply make ineffective everything that Americans want or our elected officials have achieved just by simply putting in a guy who's not going to do his job, because that's his job, to enforce the rules that are in place, and he's choosing not to enforce it. Okay, so you could say the same thing about Obama and the immigration thing. Those were rules on books. So I completely understand that, but I don't agree with either one. Just you got to if you have a problem with the rules, get rid of those rules. Go to Congress. Like it goes back to the executive power. For him to be able to put someone in place that's not going to do their job and just be fine, I think that's ridiculous.
Absolutely true.
Like if I work anywhere and I don't do what I'm told or I don't do the job duties, I'm going to get fired. But that's not how it works in the government. There's all these loopholes to get what you want done. So, and like I look at it objectively, just like Obama and DACA. Like we have immigration rules on the books. If he really felt like it was important, he should have made more of an effort to go to Congress. Just like Trump, if he really felt like the environment wasn't important, go to Congress, change the laws.
Definitely. Yeah, I think like something that I think was always the intention for the president to be was someone who, for the most part, just let Congress do its job of leading the country. Be more of like a figurehead. And, you have a specific set of duties outlined to you in the Constitution. And you should not hardly ever stray from those.
Right.
And I think that's what gets lost a lot. And we definitely see it on both sides. Both sides want power. both sides want more consolidated, unified, centralized power, which I think is what leads to so many problems. Because the second that you become stronger in your post, whether it be Congress or the executive branch, that parties are going to switch within a couple of years, and they'll have that much power.
Yeah, no, that's why I felt like Obama was pretty short-sighted in that, and obviously Democrats. We had it for 8 years, the presidential office. Mm-hmm. But like we were fine, Democrats are fine with everything Obama did. Mm-hmm. But now that Trump's using the same powers, it's like, oh no, that's unconstitutional.
Exactly.
It's like, what are you talking about? You saw the same thing happen just for your agenda.
If you have like these programs like DACA that are contingent on executive overreach, you don't get to be upset once they're repealed by executive power.
No, exactly. So I agree with I guess I support the idea of it, like Trump being able to repeal it, because it's at the end of the day, it's not a law. Mm-hmm. It's not. It's an executive action. Yeah. Right. So he has every right to get rid of it. I think he's a bad human being for getting rid of it. Okay. His motives, but he has every right to. Mm-hmm. So. And going to the next one of his other accomplishments. What did you say unemployment was at?
19-year low.
17-year low.
17-year low. So if I'm not mistaken, it was under 5% or under 3% under Obama. What was it? That's not a tangible piece of evidence, but I don't even need the real number. Yeah. But it's continued to go down. But what's very irritating is both sides love to do it. It's like when Trump was, when it was candidate Trump, he was saying how these numbers are all made up and how they're inaccurate. Mm-hmm. But now he's using the same numbers from the same government. The same government data, and now they make sense.
As long as if it's their agenda, they're just going to keep pushing those numbers.
Exactly, and I talked to a lot of supporters. Like, unemployment's at an all-time low. It's like, dude, I told you the same thing 2 years ago, and you said those numbers were fake. It's like, no, it's real now. It's like, no, that they're collecting it the same way. Yeah. So make a decision: is it real or is it not? I think they're real. Obama, he brought it down from close to 10%. Down to under 5%, under 4%, right?
Yeah, I'm looking at the thing for November. Unemployment. It was 9.9 in 2009, November. Yeah. When he was in office. Mm-hmm. And then, so he took office January. It's 7.8. Okay. And then that November goes to 9.9. Okay. And then today and then Obama eventually 2016 November brought it to 4.6. Okay. So 5 points lower. And then now next year is 4.1.
Yeah, see, I continue to have faith in that number because they're not changing the way they collect the data, and I think that's fine. I'm sure it has its flaws. It doesn't count for people that aren't actively searching for jobs, and I think that's a inaccurate number because of that. But we've always collected the data the same way, so the fact that Trump's gloating about this makes me almost irritated because he denounced these same statistics when he was running, when it counted for the other side. So it's just the hypocrisy.
But even with that fault, which I agree with you is a fault of Trump, it doesn't necessarily take away from that being.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. So my gripe is with him gloating about it when he at once ridiculed it. Absolutely. But I still think it's good. But at the same time, I think he's still riding the Obama train as far as why it's happening. The biggest thing was the stimulus package and the bailouts, and the regulations they put on corporations, whether you like it or not. Yeah. And especially the stock market with Dodd-Frank. So. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I certainly think a big part of it is just kind of not remembering what your government's positions are supposed to mean. The executive branch, legislative branch, they all have things outlined in the Constitution.
That's true.
I think often once you take liberties with that and creative liberties of what you think your job is, then it bites you in the ass the next administration. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So speaking of things in the Constitution that people often forget about, guns. We live in California, in which heavy gun regulations are often imposed upon gun owners. And in our presence, we have a gun owner who has been affected by those regulations. So if Harvey could tell us a bit about his experience with guns.
I guess to talk about the regulations. So what I feel is the biggest infringement is, I guess I'll start with a little background. When talking about the right to carry, there are shall issue states and may issue states. California is a may issue state, meaning they may or may not issue you a concealed weapons permit, even if you meet all the requirements, that not being a felon, not having, violent misdemeanors, not having mental mental issues that will stop you from owning a gun. And there shall issue states such as Minnesota, Arizona, just to name a couple. And those states basically say if you're not a felon and you don't have any violent crimes on you and you don't have any mental issues, then we will give you the right to carry a gun in public. It'll just be concealed. Mm-hmm. So that's my biggest gripe, because me as a responsible gun owner and someone who wants to protect my friends and family around me, however, like the amount of times that I would statistically use it are almost like non-existent. Just the fact that it's a constitutional right for me to bear arms, but it's taken away once I'm in public. And even though I'm, for all intents and purposes, an upstanding citizen, that's my biggest gripe with California. And then another thing is just their regulations on the kind of guns you can have. So the media and Democratic lawmakers like to make the AR-15 America's most popular gun. It's essentially just a semi-automatic rifle that just looks like it's a military rifle. It doesn't operate like a military rifle. It doesn't fire automatically. It just fires as fast as you can pull the trigger, just like any standard handgun. Yeah. Right? So they put weird regulations on that, like you can't have a forward forend, which is just basically a 90-degree piece of plastic or metal that comes down from the end of the barrel. Like you guys all play Call of Duty. Yeah. That just makes it more sturdy to hold. Mm-hmm. Okay. They also outlawed a extendable or adjustable buttstock at the end that sits on your shoulder. Mm-hmm. That can't be adjustable. It has to be fixed. Okay. And is there like a motive particular to that? Just I don't want to discredit them saying there's no motive. I can't think of anything, and I couldn't find anything. I just know that is illegal in California, and given an exception, I'll say that at the end. And also a pistol grip. So like a 90-degree piece of plastic that comes down, lets you have the trigger, hold the trigger easier. That's also illegal. Mm-hmm. So basically, there are workarounds that. So if you want these cool features like the extendable buttstock, adjustable, the forend, the pistol grip, there is basically what you have to do. You have to make sure your gun has a locked magazine. I mean, you press the button, it doesn't come out. Yeah. You have to take the gun apart. It's only like one little clip, and the gun breaks into two. It's a breakaway gun, and you have to load it like that. Yeah. Or if you want to go around that and you want the removable magazine, what you need is a featureless AR-15 or a featureless assault rifle. So basically what that is, it gets rid of the pistol grip. All it does is turn the pistol grip 45 degrees, so it's like just an angle grip. Mm-hmm. I can speak from experience, that does nothing for it. Mm-hmm. It's just an inconvenient extra part I had to buy. Yeah. And then for the adjustable stock, I bought an adjustable stock, and the work around that is to drill a hole into it and pin it in the position you want. Yeah. So it's not easily adjustable, so. And then the forend, you can't have a 90-degree forend, but you're going to have an angled forend, which is honestly more ergonomic. Yeah. So it's just the fact that these legislators use my tax dollars to sit there and debate these meaningless gun reform that for some reason they think will stop gun crime. But I would like to know your guys' opinion. Like those features I described, do you think those would actually stop gun crimes? And I guess the one I didn't mention was at the end of the barrel, it's known as a flash suppressor. It hides the gunpowder blowing up at the end. Okay. You can't have that, and like I said, you can have all that just if you have that unremovable magazine, the breakaway gun. Okay. Yeah. So, but if you want to get rid of that, all you gotta have is featureless. So, I don't know your opinion on guns, but what do you think about that? Like California's approach. We'll start out with that.
Those laws seem so insanely arbitrary and kind of more like we're kind of appealing to the base where they're trying to say we're making differences in I'm not an expert on guns by any means, but we're making a difference on like the things you can do with them. It seems kind of ridiculous and stupid. If you want to make changes, you should be making big changes, which I am more of an advocate for. I don't think you necessarily should be allowed to own guns, but I don't live in a fantasy world where I think that can ever happen in the United States. I don't think it's possible that we take away guns from the American people because it's become such an ingrained part of society. But I think there should be regulations, but there should be meaningful regulations, not like, when the grip or whatever, the 90-degree, whatever that was, and that stuff doesn't make sense to me. Why is that the thing you're regulating, and how is that going to change anything?
Okay.
Exactly, yeah. It feels exactly like, a mirror of what we were just talking about, President Trump.
Yeah.
He does all these like things like the Paris Climate Accord. It's just kind of...
It's symbolic.
Yeah. It's like, guns are scary.
Mm-hmm.
You guys think they're scary, so we're going to make it like...
less menacing.
Yeah, exactly. It's just completely arbitrary, completely playing to your base, and has no intelligent philosophical...
No, not at all.
Yeah.
So I'll touch on what you said what you just said about how you don't think anyone should own guns, but I do respect the fact that you're, objective enough to think that we can't get rid of them. So now I'll even give you that. I think we should be able to own guns, but I would admit that if we were able to get all guns out of the entire world, we would be safer. I think anyone who says otherwise doesn't know what they're talking about, or they're too ingrained in their, in their ideology. So if we were able to get rid of all guns, even in the United States, right, that would be better, right? Australia did that, right?
Yeah.
But I think when a lot of people bring up Australia, they fail to understand just basic things like the demographic. Mm-hmm. The Australian population is only 24 million people. That's the population of the greater Los Angeles area, and that's double the population of San Diego. So, you just put that in perspective. We have 350 million, and it's about the same size country. And you look at where Australia is located, they're an island continent, right? Mm. You can't smuggle anything there, right? And if you do, it's very difficult. It's by boat.
Yeah.
And that's pretty easy, with a little bit of work to police, even like planes.
And we're right on the border with Mexico.
Yeah, we're on the border of Mexico, and getting into Mexico is very easy, especially from South America. And, you can fly in from any country. They don't have hard foreign policy or foreign travel restrictions. Mm-hmm. So we're always going to be fighting that.
Yeah.
So getting rid of guns, and especially considering that we have over, I think, we have a gun for every American. Mm-hmm. Just the sheer amount. We have 350 to 400 million guns in the United States that we know of. I don't know if those are registered, but that we know of. And I don't know, God knows how many we don't know of, Yeah. So getting rid of them is just simply not a solution. And then so I don't know what the solution is. I just feel like if my answer isn't arm everyone, because that's what the NRA wants, and I think that's for politically motivated and monetary reasons. So I don't feel like they speak for me. But just like in Minnesota, they're like I said, they're a shall issue state, and I feel like what they do, or I think they still do it. They do it the best way that I can think of. So back in the 90s, Jesse Ventura, when he was governor, he basically said anyone who wants a CCW can get one. He went to the legislature, he went through the proper places, and he made that happen. Because before they were a may issue state. So basically what he said, you have to go through a background check. You can't be a felon. You can't have any violent crimes on you, right? And you have to take an in-class gun safety course. I think it was 4 to 8 hours. And then you have to take an actual in-person, like you're dealing with the gun, and you have to, I think, score 70% on whatever parameters they set at the range, right? So what that does right there in that process, make sure you're not a criminal, make sure you don't have a violent past, make sure you don't have any mental illnesses that would, make you become violent, and it ensures that you know how to use the gun. I feel like the biggest thing with gun crime, because, I do understand that gun crime and gun deaths is a problem in America. You'd be naive not to think it is, but the solution is education. Educate people on how to use guns. You know, like the fact that like these California legislators think that they can stop gun crime, or maybe they know, maybe it's just ulterior motive like Trump, but the fact that they're giving the notion that they're stopping gun crime by getting rid of my pistol grip, by getting rid of my buttstock, like what are you talking about? I can shoot just as fast with a handgun. What are you really stopping? You know?
Yeah.
So
like we see it time and time again whenever the government, you know, has the intention of trying to stop something, and so their solution is to, you know, get rid of it completely. It never works, you know, and we see that with things like the drug war
and prohibition.
Yeah, you know, we see it with prohibition. We see it with abstinence only education. You know, when you decrease education in the name of fear mongering, the solution will get worse every single time.
The problem gets worse. Yeah.
Exactly. The problem gets worse every single time. Oh no, I meant no. The solution, as in the proposed solution the government gave.
Okay. Oh yeah. Gotcha. It'll become more ineffective.
Everything becomes more effective, and the problem gets worse at the same time. Yeah.
So, what do you think about that?
I think that's the way to go. The regulations is the right way to go. Like that's the way we should.
Like what I described in Minnesota, or do you have like alternative?
No, I think that's what's happening in Minnesota. That sounds smart to me. But the problem is, you know, there are lapses. It's so difficult to control because, as we saw in the Texas shooting, the Air Force didn't do their job and they didn't report that the guy had mental illnesses or whatever that was. So he was able to get a gun and he was able to get through the regulations in Texas.
Exactly.
And that's the problem we face most because so many of these people who aren't fit to carry guns, we don't know they're not fit to carry guns. So they can just go and they can buy a gun, and then that's when we're in a dangerous situation. Mm-hmm. And again, there's no point in philosophically debating whether we should have guns or shouldn't have guns because there's no way we're going to get rid of guns. There's no way it's going to happen. And that's why I don't think it's necessary to do it. But again, other people claiming things like safe spaces, I don't remember what they're called.
Gun-free zones?
Gun-free zones. That's ridiculous. If you can't use a gun in X to Y, you're going to go buy it Z and you're going to come back and shoot up X to Y. Like, what is that?
Exactly, yeah. It's the same, like, philosophy. Like, if you got rid of all guns, only people with guns are going to be people who are okay with breaking the law.
Yeah.
You know? So you don't want that to be 100% of the gun-owning population.
Exactly. I want to touch on Texas because that personally got me angry as a responsible gun owner, just like any mass shooting does, any gun crime, right? But that got me especially angry because seeing both sides, Republicans like prominent talk show hosts like Bill O'Reilly and I don't know, he's the only one I can conclusively say said it. He said it's the cost of freedom. That was very irritating to me because I was like, no, someone failed to do their job. The Air Force didn't report the 2 domestic violences that he was convicted for and the animal abuse he was charged with, So it came down to a lack of communication. Mm-hmm. So there is absolutely something we can do. Because if that was there, we can't sit here and talk about whether he was able to get a gun if he wasn't able to buy it legally.
Yeah.
Right? But we can clearly say he couldn't have got it legally if people did their job.
Right.
But the right was saying it's the cost of freedom. The left was saying, hey, get rid of all guns. We need more regulation. It's like, no, all we needed to do to avoid exactly what happened there was to enforce our current laws. And I think Republicans are down with that. They're like the party of law and order.
Yeah.
Democrats are the party of gun control, And I think that was one issue that they should have saw eye to eye on.
Yeah, absolutely.
But it's just, they didn't. They're politically motivated. They want to further their agenda no matter what the cost.
Yeah.
So that was very irritating to me.
So then, you're saying you get infuriated when the cost of freedom argument is brought up, which, it's understandable. It's kind of a very weak one-sided
Yeah, you're
thing.
accepting defeat.
So then, what is your kind of thoughts on an issue like in Vegas? Right? There's no clear kind of thing there, so people turn to, that's just the cost of how we live.
With Vegas, I mean, I don't think anyone has an answer. We don't even know the guy's motive.
Exactly.
Right? So, with that, I mean, I would...
Could you say that's just the cost of freedom then?
I would be wary of that because as soon as you say that, you're accepting defeat. As I don't know, just as like a prideful person, pragmatic person. I'm against that. Like, just don't just say that's the cost. Let's talk about the solutions. Is it amped up security? Is it Is it just making sure that if you walk into a place, metal detector? Like, these are just, I don't agree with these things. These are just things that, going off the top of my head, right? Are they going to check your bags for guns? He had 15 guns in there. That seems a little odd. Like, if I'm trying to go into the Mandalay Bay Hotel and I have a CCW, I'd rather them not know about it. But at the same time, I would want them to know if someone had 15 guns, So again, I don't have the solution. But what I don't like is the dialogue that's happening right now, which is like, I think it was Jimmy Kimmel. I did not like, because it was like 4 to 5 minute like little speech he gave in the beginning of the show, and the first 2-3 minutes very heartwarming. Like the first half very heartwarming. Like he empathized very well with the victims and as a country the difficult time that we're going through and the problem with like gun deaths, right? And then he turned very dark, at least in my opinion, because he started saying, like, if he started blaming the NRA, he started blaming establishment Republicans, for their motive and like, oh, all you care about is money, all you care about is, is arming everyone, and he started basically saying that to just conservatives in general or anyone who is pro-gun, and then so he literally said like, you have blood on your hands if you don't support, gun control. And it's like, wait a minute, like, me as the American who feels just as badly and just as empathetic, just as compassionate about the lives lost, just because I don't agree with your flawed logic about, gun control, I'm suddenly a murderer. You're a prominent talk show host. You're what a lot of people go to for news and entertainment. You're going to call half of Americans murderers? Like, how dare you?
Yeah, it's so like disingenuous in like an intellectual setting too. Like we see with Piers Morgan, and Ben Shapiro when they had him when he was on a show, and he like blames conservatives for like Sandy Hook.
Exactly.
Like a responsible gun owner, which is the majority of the country, for children dying. It's ridiculous. Like you can agree that guns are inherently bad and that maybe American citizens shouldn't have them. But that doesn't mean that the responsible gun owner is responsible for children dying.
And the way that Kimmel did it, he was trying to shame people into kind of agreeing with him, and that's just the 100% the wrong way to do it. And instead of posing the issues, he's like, if you don't agree with me, then like you said, you're a murderer, or you're an idiot, or whatever it was that he was saying. But I talked to Sean, and we talked about this quite a few times before, but. I think you said that if we were to do it again, you'd be fine with Americans having, from the very beginning, when the United States was instituted as a country.
Yeah.
You said you'd like them to have gun. If we were to do it again, you'd still want the Second Amendment to be in place, right?
So like, if I was like alive back then, I would be supporting the Second Amendment.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So Harvey, would you do the same thing? Would you be?
Yeah. So
if there was a possibility of stopping it at the very start, there would be no guns in the United States after that if you disagree with it.
Okay, so we all agree on like the first part of our discussion, right? Like, just pragmatism, and you agreed with the Minnesota approach. So that's I think that's really cool. But so now moving on to more like philosophical almost, right? Right. If you can go back and get rid of it, I'd have to agree with Sean. I don't think so, because if you look at every, like, okay, number one, you look at like how we gained our independence. If we didn't have guns, we would have still been a British colony. They weren't open to diplomatic talks or anything like that. And if you look at throughout history, like whether it be like Chinese dictators or in the Philippines in like the 60s and 70s, or even most recently, a new Filipino dictator, right? I don't know his name, but like their first move, and even Hitler, like I hate bringing that up because I feel like he's overused, but all these dictators and all these like crazy regimes, their very first move is always to disarm their people. Yeah. And I mean, like, why is that? Like Hitler did that not with his majority, but with Jewish people. I forgot the act name, but there's literally a law that you can look up, and he confiscated all weapons from the Jews, and they gave it up because they didn't want to make things worse. That's understandable human nature, right? But so you just look at like the abuse in like the history of gun control. It's never been used to keep people safer. So I don't think Democrats have that in mind. But I think to give up our gun rights is naive, because even if you think we're like a very modern 2018, like this is super like Western, like we're not gonna have a dictator, right? Who's to say in 50 or 100 years you know what's gonna happen? Because I mean, even now in this like great time, 2018, you have countries like oppressive regimes like in Iran. You have oppressive regimes in Syria. They're in a civil war. North Korea, the biggest one we can think of, and obviously China still. But I mean, like, and all those people, like, North Korea, China, they don't have guns. Iran, I don't know what their situation is, but I imagine they don't have a whole lot of artillery either.
Yeah, it's like a special request.
Yeah, selection carry.
But nothing is protected.
Exactly. So I think it's naive to give the government that kind of power to take away your guns. Because while I see the side that, like, oh, if the government wanted to take your guns, like, they have nukes, they can take it from you. Like, I get it, but, like, what's stopping them is the fact that there's 400 million guns in America. And, going to like foreign threats in World War II, the reason that we were bombed via jets and airplanes by the Japanese was after the war, we interviewed a lot of different Japanese military officials, and they said they didn't put boots on the ground because they knew the vast majority of Americans were well armed, unlike their people. So it keeps us safe, whether it be literally like we're using it or, for the most part, just like, hey, our potential, just like the U.S. talking a bigger scale, we have the ability to blow up the world 17 times with our nuclear weapons. Obviously, we don't do that, but countries know that, and just the fact that our government knows that we're all armed and they can't take us without a lot of lives lost, they're not going to do it.
Yeah.
The thing I see, I think that's the most logical way to argue pro-gun things, and I respect that, and I think it makes a lot of sense. But, at the end of the day, the question is, you said in 50 or 100 years, the potential for this kind of oppressive regime to take hold in the United States. 10,000 people die at the hand of guns every year in the United States. Are you willing to sacrifice millions of lives over this however long it takes to get the oppressive regime into office, just in case this monster ever shows up?
Yeah, so I see what you're saying, but like, and I know your statistics accurate. 10,000 lives a year, maybe that's even a conservative number, but the vast majority of that is gang violence, right? Mm-hmm. So, and that's not mass murders, that's not mass shootings, right? That's just gang on gang violence. So let's say you get rid of guns. Guns don't exist in this world, right? Gangs are still going to kill each other. People are still going to kill each other. So it's those numbers will be reduced, but by only so much.
But the thing is, it's so much easier to go across the street and pull a trigger than it is to go behind someone and stab them to death.
Yeah,
it's a very different situation there.
Yeah, but I mean, like, even like we saw it in New York City, and we see it a lot in Europe. Just like when you're talking about mass attacks, like, or even like like you're saying, stab someone. Like, they have acid attacks very regularly, almost as common as we have gun deaths. And they have truck attacks where someone gets a semi and kills 80 people. We never had that number. Our biggest was Vegas, 56. Mm-hmm. And that's obviously unacceptable. And I want to sit down and talk about a solution to that. But to say obviously guns make it easier, but people will always find a way. So as far as like you're saying, it's like a cost benefit ratio, right? Whether you want the protection to fight against the potential dictators or oppressive regime, or do you want to save 10,000 lives a year, right? I don't think we can even have that discussion or talk about that question because you're never going to get rid of the deaths. Gangs will always be fighting each other. People will always be killing each other, and we see that in restricted countries, even in Europe. Mm-hmm. So I feel like that number it's true, but it's misleading in that the number of mass shootings we have is a much smaller number.
Okay. Yeah. I don't know if the exact statistic, but I think we have, it might be like 4 murders per 10,000 people, something along those lines. And for those 4 murders, 3 of them are due to gun violence, as compared to other countries that I think that the top was like Japan or something. I don't know. It might have been the 2s, and they don't have gun violence. I think the difference there is kind of, because even if you can take that number from 10,000 and make it 3,000, I think that's a huge step in the right direction. If you could take away 7,000 people, save 7,000 lives, that's a lot of lives. And I'm not even People always bring up the number 30,000. 20,000 of those are suicide deaths, right? So I don't think we can talk about that while we're talking about gun issues because I don't think it applies. But, I think that's kind of the number I think it's vital to try to lower. And again, this is purely philosophical, and I said I didn't think it was necessary to debate it, but
I think this is very interesting. But I see what you're saying as far as if we could lower it, then I'm sure it would become lower if you got rid of guns. But I think it would be almost a negligible amount because if we look at most murders, like I said, it's gang on gang violence or it's individual against another individual, right? So in that kind of scenario, if you told me or if I'm in a gang scenario and I need to go kill someone, I don't need a gun. It's very easy to kill someone, It's just that we don't do it, No one has the drive for that.
The thing is that you have the gun violence plus the other violence, the vans hitting, driving over, mowing people down, essentially. Yeah. We have that, and then we have the guns to add to it. So it's kind of a conglomerate of all of the...
I would argue those maybe there's some overlap, right? But I think most of it's overlap. Maybe some are added because of guns. But I think if you got rid of guns, took them out of the equation,
then more violence would.
Yeah, you would see more knife attacks. You would see more acid attacks, more truck attacks. So, I would, and just for that small potential, saving a few lives. I feel like those lives could be saved in a much different way. Okay. The biggest contributor to gang violence is it happens in lower income areas, right? Because people don't have solutions to their generation after generation. They're stuck in poverty. Mm-hmm. You can invest in those communities. You don't see gangs in Rancho Bernardo. You don't see gangs in, Beverly Hills. In nicer areas.
Yeah, I completely agree. I saw the Ben Shapiro thing with Piers Morgan, and he was talking about how in Chicago, in the rundown areas of the violence with just handguns, right? If we were to clean those areas up, then we'd have a severe drop in gun violence. And the thing is, I can completely see the logic with what you guys are saying, and I completely agree with you in a lot of ways. But I think what you're saying makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, so I certainly wouldn't. I would never give up the right to own a gun, and I would fight. Obviously diplomatically first, very vocally. Mm-hmm. I wouldn't support any candidate like Dianne Feinstein or those crazy gun nuts, and I think it's naive for society to get rid of their guns because Australia holds it proud, and maybe it works for them because they're so small. Yeah. But like I said, just given the potential of all these regimes we've seen through history, we need to learn from them, mm-hmm. And as far as combating gun violence, there's a better way to do it. Mm-hmm. You can be smart. All gun violence happens in lower income areas.
Right. Yeah. And you see the left pretending it's possible to take away all guns. That is a completely ridiculous notion that I don't think could ever happen. Yeah. Even a cash for gun type situation with the government won't go over well.
Those clearly don't work. Yeah. We've seen those are ineffective.
Yeah. For me, people, when it's brought up that, there's not really an oppressive regime right now. In the United States, we have a beautiful democratic republic. We don't need to worry about that. But how I see it is the government taking away guns is the act of the oppressive government in and of itself. That it is indicative of there being an oppressive government once the guns are taken away. So it fulfills the prophecy immediately. Once they take away guns, it becomes that oppressive government.
Are you saying that's the motive, or that's just?
I'm saying that's the indication that it's becoming the oppressive government is when the guns are taken away, which is when you need the guns the most.
I don't think that's fair to say because I think that's the opposite of what Jimmy Kimmel's doing. That's on the other end. Not
intentionally, I'm saying.
Okay.
I'm saying that's leading susceptible to becoming that. That's
no, for sure. No, I absolutely agree. And what I find funny, it's interesting. When Donald Trump was elected, it was everyone's it's the rise of the alt-right, it's the rise of the neo-Nazi movement. This is the extreme left. Mm-hmm. Obviously this is all wrong, or at least I think it's wrong. But he's a Nazi, he's gonna do this, he's gonna kill LGBT members. If you truly believe that, why are you on the same side that wants your guns taken away? Yeah. If you really think you're fighting Hitler, which you're not. But if you really think you're fighting Hitler,
don't let Hitler take your guns.
Why are you giving Hitler your guns? Like,
yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, it's like I find it very hypocritical. Like neither side has a clear train of thought when it comes to, anything, but especially gun rights.
I think we've come to a point where it's just like a contrarian movement. Just if the right says something, the left has to disagree, and if the right says something, if the left says something, then the right has to disagree.
Yeah, no, I agree.
And we need that middle ground, and that's like the thing that I think we should be focusing on eventually trying to instate, and like tearing down these walls between the parties, because there seems to be like this thing that a Republican can't agree with a Democrat and a Democrat can't agree with a Republican. Why is that? Mm-hmm. If I agree with if I identify as a Democrat or I identify as a Republican, and I see that the left is saying something that makes sense, I'm willing to swing for that. It shouldn't be such a polarizing thing. Parties shouldn't have such a stronghold on how society works.
Exactly.
And contrary to what the media is showing us, like I do see that changing, because like I love talking politics, that's why I was excited to be here. But like what I've noticed is people are very willing to compromise, like hardcore conservatives. Like I know a lot of Trump supporters, I used to work in law enforcement, like I know a lot of them, and all of them like would agree with exactly what we're talking about here, and like feel like, I consider myself pretty centrist just because I pick and choose what issues I want from the sides. But like these are Trump supporters, and we like to make Trump supporters out to be like alt-right, crazy, racist, but no, man, like everyone's willing to compromise. It's just we're seeing this from the top down, like our unfortunately our representatives are making it seem like the other side's evil, and especially our news media. Like when Trump says fake news, I don't agree with what he views as fake news, but I don't trust what CNN says just as much as I don't trust what Fox says. Yeah.
I was about to agree with exactly what you said. I was about to say myself where, we're not nearly as politically divided as, media, even online would have you think. If you go in places like Reddit, it's just a lot of explosive safe spaces. Right. But at the same time, we have to remember we live in, Southern California, a generally liberal area with Republican splotches. Yeah. So it's very easy for a lot of people to be
agreeing with each other.
You're right. But at the same time, you see, if you go to places like the South, or you go to places like San Francisco, there is a mindset that is kind of in the air there. And I don't have personal experience, but I feel like in those places it'd definitely be more divisive if you have a dissenting opinion. And we have to remember
I think there is this social taboo with not like picking one side. I don't know if you guys know Steven Crowder. He's a conservative voice, and he kind of shames people for not saying if they're conservative or they're liberal. I think it's better to kind of stay in the middle and view things objectively, look at what you're seeing, and I think that builds common ground, because if you're not saying right away, if I'm talking to someone and I say I'm a liberal and they say they're a conservative, there's a gap there. There's already like a gap. But if you don't affiliate with a party necessarily, then you find yourself willing to agree with each other more, and then that's kind of how some movements start and things go forward.
Exactly. Like I'm sure if I took a random conservative, I could, we didn't say like what our ideologies were, I could have a conversation with him for hours on just things we agreed upon. Yeah. And same with a liberal. Right. But then the second that each person is identified like, oh, he's a liberal, he's a conservative, there's like a tension.
Already like a mental block going on.
Yeah, and I feel like even though it's not as prevalent as, oh, I hate you. Yeah. Like as people would think, it still exists. Yeah. Unfortunately.
Going back to what you said, I do acknowledge that we live in a bubble, just like anyone who hasn't left their community for a great deal of time. Any community, whether it's the South or whether it's here, lives in somewhat of a bubble. But at the same time, like I feel like I've been on a lot of different ends of the spectrum. Law enforcement, that you'll probably find being in Southern California, that you're gonna find the most conservative people there. Especially like the outspoken ones, because there were a lot of liberals. It's diverse, but the level of conservatism is a lot more than you normally see. And like I've worked in the private sector as well. Whether it be at 7-Eleven or Wells Fargo, and I mean, for the most part, like it's just once you get past like what you guys are saying, like just like the naming people or the labels, like, oh, I'm a liberal, I voted for Hillary, or no, I'm a Bernie guy, or I'm a Trump guy. Once you get past that and you start talking actual ideas, everyone's very open once they're educated. It's like, even when it comes to gun control, even the most passionate people I've met that are like, that want to take away guns, once you educate them, you're at an equal level. You're like, hey, this is the actual scenario. Like, let's hear what you say, and this, like, here's my experience. They're willing to compromise.
Yeah.
But it's just, we don't see that in our elected officials because they play to our weaknesses. Mm-hmm. They play to, like, oh, look, Trump's doing something Hitler did, and it's just like, no, like, that's not good for the country.
Exactly, and I think it's so important that people educate themselves on the other side. Yeah. I've always said, like, if you can't see the other side of the issue and you can't make a reasonable argument for the side you disagree on, you're not qualified to have an opinion in the first place.
The thing is,
I agree.
I've lived on the East Coast, and I've lived in very red areas, and we've talked politics, and we've had agreements, and we've had disagreements, and I've talked with people who I generally in the left, and people who you think I originally was very left. I've kind of become centrist now, but you'd agree with, but you find disagreements there too. And like Harvey said, I think education is the best way to do it, because you need to make sure everyone's on the same level of understanding of the subject, then you talk. Because it's not fair if someone's way more educated and the other person not educated, then of course you're going to have a huge gap. There's not going to be the understanding between the two groups. And I think that's something we need to work on. And first, instead of just going straight into debating each other, we should go into discussing and like talking about what the stats are, or what the actual evidence is behind our points.
Absolutely. And I really hope, like, with this new year turning, and like we've kind of settled down from the shock of Trump winning the election in his first year.
Yeah.
I hope that more people kind of move towards that direction,
right,
of kind of building bridges between us in terms of discussions.
I think at least I've been seeing it. You can't, like I said, you can't take the media or Reddit or whatever social media, and you can't take that seriously, or like even CNN and Fox. But as far as just like interpersonal, dialogue, just between me and my friends, my coworkers, I've definitely seen that. People are more willing to talk politics if you come from like a neutral standpoint. Not like neutral where like you're wishy-washy, but like you come like, hey, like, what do you think? Mm-hmm. Like, not like, oh, this is the right way. But as long as you keep an open mind and you come at an equal playing field, or like just you approach it well, people are willing to talk. And we're going to see more of that, but unfortunately, we won't see that in the media, and we certainly won't see it in Congress, because the midterm elections are coming up, and it's going to become more politically divisive. And then so I think the best thing I can hope for is just the main candidates that are running get upset by third party, whether they're liberal or conservative, or whether they're libertarian, just an outsider. Mm-hmm. That's the best we can hope for, because they're not in the money of it. Mm-hmm. They're someone who actually wants to make a difference, mm-hmm. not a career politician.
Right. Yeah, I can see that. Although it's
I want to see that. I want to see. I don't see it happening, but that's what I want to see.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's like kind of breaking the mold, so there's like a lot more pieces that people can put together.
Right. That's why Trump got elected. Under the false notion that he was an outsider. Mm-hmm. He's about as an insider as you can get. But
exactly, just like the other side of it.
Yeah, exactly.
Crony capitalism. He's the other side.
So yeah, I mean, but like I said, like I'll say it again, like we will see more interpersonal dialogue.
Yeah.
Because just the crazies on both sides get highlighted.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And everyone thinks that's who the other side is, but that's not the case.
That's why I really love like the foundation of our own show.
Mm-hmm.
We called ourselves Two View because we wanted to appeal to we wanted to have that discussion. Mm-hmm. We wanted to bring different viewpoints at the table and educate each other so we can understand where other people come from, and that our listeners can too.
Yeah.
And I think that's really the best thing that politics can get.
Mm-hmm.
That mutual understanding. A lack of divisiveness, a lack of name calling each other the next Hitler, things of that nature. Being disingenuous, whether you're Kimmel or just like presenting everyone in an honest way and understanding there's more than one viewpoint that's valid.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Awesome, guys. I think we had a great show today.
Yeah.
We touched on a lot of things, and it was a fun time. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for having me on. It was a lot of fun, honestly.
Yeah. Awesome. We, Two of You, wishes a good time to you and yours, and we hope to see you. Tune in next time. Bye.
See you guys.